All right. Molo Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Good evening, good evening, good evening. To this another episode of the Big Daddy Liberty Show. I'm hoping my sound levels are okay. I am in a noisy restaurant, people, so if you're hearing some background noise, unfortunately, it is what it is. As long as you can hear me clearly. Another disclaimer, I have a bad flu and I'm losing my voice. So that's why it sounds a bit, what's the word? Muted? No, not muted, but just muffled in a sense. So I'll let you guys in the comment section let us know whether you can hear us clearly. But that aside, a reminder to you that your only price of admission here on the Big Daddy Liberty Show is to hit that like button. That's right, smash that like button whether you're watching this broadcast on Facebook or on YouTube or Twitter. And if it is YouTube in particular, then consider please subscribing to the channel. It's as easy as just joining the over 41,700 of you who are fans of the show. Find me on YouTube, subscribe. Of course, we have a website. A reminder to you, you can find us at BigDaddyLiberty.com. There, of course, you can also pledge some support towards the channel. Now, that being said, let me introduce my guest. And also just keep an eye on the comment section. Celeste, thank you so much for the comments that you can hear us clearly. I really do appreciate that. I will need to drop this mic, but also to interfere with my beard. Let me get my guest on, because again, this is someone who, writer and analyst, co-host of the Man Patria podcast. He's a chap who you often see him on Liberty and Friends. I'm talking, of course, about Koketso Risane. There he is on screen. Koketso, Baba, good evening.
Yeah, good evening. Maybe I'll put out my own disclaimer. I do not have a bad cold or anything like that. So yeah, this is my voice in all its 100% glory.
Good to have you on the show. Koketso, we're going to be quite brief on this broadcast because it's something which it relatively came to me last minute today on social media when I was reading various headlines. And at the heart of them all is this idea that I'm picking up that, and let me rephrase this, maybe for me personally, I've grown very suspicious of wealth and wealthy people, and in particular, Black wealth. Why do I say this? Because to a large extent, a lot of the headlines you see when it comes to corruption of a mega scale are these wealthy individuals who basically became rich off of these get-rich-quick schemes, whatever they may be, whether they're legal or illegal, right? So, for example, the illegal stuff could be the Zamazamas and the big syndicates there, or guys who are fleecing coal from Eskom to the extent of R1 billion, a month, or legal versions of looting, such as Black economic empowerment, or broad-based, that misnomer, broad-based Black economic empowerment. Well, these deals are often a guise, a fig leaf for looting. But before I get into that, I want to show a quick clip. They'll probably have my video demonetized, but I don't care. The topic is more important. I want to show a quick clip of a Nando's advert. I think they pick up the same sentiment too. And Nando's, being Nando's, did a very funny advert in this regard, making fun of these political elites who are corrupt and make this mega money through corrupt means. Watch this. And whilst you're waiting, folks, do me a favor, please, and hit that like button and share the stream. Here is that Nando's advert making fun of politicians and the political elites.
As MPs, we've been lambasted for overspending. So in the interest of ordinary South Africans, I got me a more modest car.
As a minister, I have to be more careful about my overspending. So I've moved to a more humble home.
In these tough times, we have also learned to tighten our belts.
3 peri-peri wings and chips for only 19 Rand 95. Yo, now that's respect.
19 Rand 95. Those were the days, weren't it? Okay, chime in here, Put.
So I didn't catch your last word. You were asking how I am. Oh,
No, I'm saying chime in, come in here on this issue.
oh, okay.
You know, this growing perception that wealth and
Yeah, yeah.
wealthiness is akin to criminality in this country.
Right. So yeah. So I'm glad you've actually the thought has actually come across your mind today. For some of us, maybe I'll claim that it's been on my mind for north of 5 years already. I'll tell you why I've been thinking about it, right? One of the things I've said a few times already by now is how, even amongst Black people, the scorn that is leveled at those who do attain wealth without a government contract, for example, that people know about publicly at the very least. You know, if you are a Black man or woman and you get your money and you get financially wealthy, people start questioning where your wealth comes from, and you'll often hear things like, but we don't know how he makes his money. You know, that's basically them saying that we don't know what contract or what BEE tender he's involved in, and therefore by implication his money must come from quote unquote white monopoly capital, therefore he must be some form of puppet. Now that's the culture that's actually been said here, and what that basically says is you are not allowed to, as a, I'll use person of color, you're not allowed to be financially successful, or you're not allowed to fall into the 1% if no one can point to the government contracts that are in your name. That begs the question then of, what of those who do have government contracts then? Is it just a conduit for achieving wealth, or do they have the government contract because they legitimately want to deliver a service, and the state is paying for legitimate services that are legitimately delivered to you and I using our taxpayer, and of course with you and I being those on the receiving end, be it garbage collection, be it SASSA grants for those who depend on grants, be it something as simple as having toilet paper at the hospital, or the black pen that should be at the counter in every police station that seems to never exist. That's the culture we live in, unfortunately. And again, when you make your money without a tender people can point to, Black people especially, they look at that with suspicion. And I'm now saying that I'm going to flip it over on its head, and I'm going to say that that means those who do have a contract, we should probably look at those with suspicion. It's very unfortunate because, again, it is applying a layer of racism to say, because you're Black, we should take a closer look at your affairs. But how did we get here? We got here because people don't legitimately expect you to do clean business with the state. And that's more reflection on the state than on the actual people who are doing the business.
And again, you raised two important points here. And again, I must apologize for the poor sound levels on my side. My voice is burnt and gone because of this flu. So I'll push through. That's Coquette. You raised an important point here. Insofar as there's two things at issue. One, we can't discount the fact that the true economic empowerment in this country has been the greater access to education, especially for those who are lucky enough to have gotten education at so-called former Model C schools or private schools, because that's the real category of Black individual who's done well via education on balance. On balance, of course, that's not to say the poor kids from poor Black areas haven't done well. Of course they have, but those Black people who are more privileged and had better access to quality education through either former white schools, Model C schools, or private schools would disproportionately do much better. They were the ones that enter university much easier, etc., etc. So that's the one ambit and angle. So the idea that actually really education and the broader access to education in this country really saw the skyrocketing of black incomes because suddenly black people got better jobs, more highly skilled jobs, etc., etc. In conjunction with that, and indeed claiming that as a victory, are the very same politicians who passed race-based legislation to then argue that any black person you see succeed is because of race-based legislation, whether it's affirmative action or Employment Equity Act or the Broad-Based Black Economic Act. And it's that tension, Koketso, that I often see play out at a middle level and of course at a top level, where if then any black person aspired to be better, worked hard, became better, became more wealthy, they unfortunately become besmirched or lumped into the same category of that get rich quick BEE scheme type black individual, who invariably also are the political elites. Is this the tension we're seeing play itself out?
Yeah, it definitely happens. And you see it in who's being celebrated, usually. So one of the important things or traditions behind things like gala dinners and having award shows, etc., is, of course, there's the element of you want to recognize people for achieving. In so doing, what you are in effect also doing at the same time is sending a signal to those who are on the up and coming, and typically those who are younger as well, that yes, it is possible, and yes, this is how you can succeed in life. We recognize individual X because they have contributed something of great value. They have reached a level of success, and we are celebrating them to affirm them in a way of all of their great achievements. That's why we do things. Now, who do we actually recognize who's doing a good job, even among black people? Right? Very few. Again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that those who arguably are deserving of recognition are put aside. Why? Because they are typically not the same kind of person who would, I would say, funnel money to the corrupt elite, for instance. Now, at the same time, let's move away from that recognition element. Let's now actually look into some examples of the type of black excellence, quote unquote, that we find out there in the real world. There's many examples. Firstly, the middle class, everything starts off from the middle class. Before you can get into the 1%, for example, you typically go through you go through a season of being in the middle class typically. The middle class is typically where most people get to generate their wealth, assuming they didn't inherit any. Now, the black middle class tripled during the Mbeki years. And as soon as Mbeki was out of office, we saw firstly a stagnation of that same middle class, and then they started to reduce in number. And there's many arguments. Some say some of them immigrated, etc., etc. But the fact is, the middle class did not grow post Mbeki. Meanwhile, the population was growing. What that speaks into is per capita GDP didn't actually increase, which is alarming for a country with so much potential. So going back to some examples, again, you'll find many every day in the different newspapers. A chap named Lawrence Molaudzi, for example, sat, don't know if he's still there, but sat on the Total Energies board for South Africa, scores a massive PIC deal, close to 50 million rand, give or take. What does he do after receiving 50 million rand? Immediately sends off about 6 million rand to Zweli Mkhize's foundation or trust fund or something of the like. Zweli Mkhize, who I believe was health minister at the time. So again, question is, what is he doing on the Total Energies board in the first place? Perhaps he's been planted there so that a company like Total Energies can receive preferential treatment at the airports company of South Africa, where fuel for planes needs to go out to tender. I'm just speculating here, but again, you can draw the lines. Hamilton Grove is another one who was found guilty of fraud, PPE fraud during the pandemic. April 2020, when no one was buying cars, anyone with a dealership will tell you that no one was buying cars. Yet this man managed to procure 6 luxury vehicles and was more than happy to post them on social media. Where did that money come from? Another one is former ANC ministers even. A lot of them serve ministerial tenures, and as soon as they're done being ministers, like them or hate them, good or bad as they might have done, somehow they end up on some of the boards of listed companies. What are they doing there? How exactly does Trevor Manuel, post-ministerial perks and post-ministerial duties, end up in the board of an Old Mutual, for example? These are questions that have to be asked. And for me, who's just a normal person, right? When I ask myself, how do I get to that level where I get to sit on the board of a listed company? How do I get to the level where I can be like Cyril Ramaphosa and sit on the board of a mine and then have to deal with the headache of striking miners and preferably not give out a pseudo instruction to use force when necessary? How do I get there? That tells me that to get there, I need to be politically connected somehow. And that's not a good look that we sent.
And that therein lies, perhaps as we taper our conversation off, therein lies the real grift when it comes to who in this country is becoming mega wealthy super quick, and why, therefore, the rest of society, who, right now as I talk to you, South Africans are barely making money. They're barely making ends meet, is the expression I was looking at. I was just chatting about this morning on Vuganas, or maybe a recording for tomorrow morning's Vuganas, where the latest data coming out of Capitec, who, of course, has about 20.1 million active subscribers or active clients, pardon me. So it has very wide data to do polling and the like, has shown that South Africans are becoming poorer. On average, South Africans are spending more on basic goods and are having less, therefore, income at the end of the month. Compound that, Koketso, with the inflation rate in this country, which has screamed up to 7.1%, then also compounds that story by saying, of whatever rands you do have, they buy less because they're worth less. That's the real South African right now, Koketso, who's sitting, and for the sake of a descriptor, I'll call them economic outsiders. It's that South African right now who's looking at this wealthy elite and wondering how exactly is that guy making it to the point where he's buying multi-million rand luxury sedans, and here I am, hardworking, faith, flag, family, freedom type South African, and I'm the one now basically putting groceries back because I can't afford those basic staples that just a few years ago used to be in my pantry.
Yeah, and it's even worse than that as well. So, of course, we've got the unemployment crisis. We've got rampant unemployment, unemployment that should not make sense, but yet here we are. And this is now where you need to understand your place in the world as, as a country full of opportunity in sub-Saharan Africa. We have plenty of opportunity in here. And then you've got government who then puts in regulation to prevent, one, new jobs being created, and then two, having your skill set potentially being rewarded at a higher income that you possibly even deserve, given what you bring to the table. I say this because of, the news broke today, I think, that Elon Musk's Starlink, one of his companies, brief synopsis, Starlink provides satellite-based internet connectivity. If it's satellite-based, it means it could almost be anywhere in the world. This effectively means this would bypass your fiber and you would put in a dish or a satellite mechanism in your house, and that's how you would get internet for your property. So not an underground cable, but you would be pointing to the sky. That's one of Elon Musk's companies. They can deliver this almost to anywhere in the world, but of course, to put it in your geography, they would have to follow local regulation. Brilliant company, even in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, some of the war-torn areas, they've been relying on Starlink for internet connectivity, particularly for the journalists who are covering on the ground, because in a war zone, one of the first key things to take out is your enemy's communication infrastructure. Great stuff. But Elon Musk cannot operate Starlink in South Africa. Why? Because he would firstly need to set up a company. And that company would need to abide by local regulation, and the local regulation in our case would also be BEE compliance, which means for Elon Musk to bring this wonderful technology to SA in a company that is already successful the world over, he would need to meet an equity target. Now, who's the government to tell someone how to run their business? Firstly, and back to my initial point, this could be a good opportunity to at least ease in the unemployment burden for those in that particular sector, and potentially for those who are looking for a new opportunity to jump ship from wherever you're working, go work at Starlink, and perhaps even earn more, which would help in this tough economic time. But Elon Musk can't do that because of regulation. And again, another case where what was supposed to be medicine, the regulation, is now actually the poison and contributing to the ailing health of the country's economy. That's the problem I have. And who is insulated from all of these realities? It's the politically elite and those who are connected to the political elite. As you and I may sit in load shedding, ministers at their houses are exempt from load shedding. And in the event where they cannot be exempted, the state will provide whatever means is necessary to make sure they can keep their lights on, while you and I have to plan our lives around when we can cook, when we can take a hot shower, and when you can do the normal things of life, including sitting at home watching this on YouTube, for instance. That's the reality that we live in. It's sad
Absolutely.
to see, and something needs to be done.
In fact, on that particular point, as we tape off our conversation on this Starlink, I remember raising this point in episode 100 of the Vuganazo morning show, where I covered this issue of Starlink, and I begged the question, how can there ever be economic prosperity in South Africa if your biggest consideration as a government, right? I'll speak as if I'm in the government, is who a person is who benefits economically versus why shouldn't an entire society benefit from this? What I mean, let me be precise and specific. If you look at race-based legislation in this country, it's quite simple now. It operates, I froze there for a minute, there we go. It operates, Koketso, on the fig leaf that it's broad-based, it's for everybody, or all Black individuals. But when you look at the inequality, the growing inequality gap in this country, it's not between white and Black, it's within Black communities now. There is a massive chasm between that poor chap who lives on a shack in the sand dune in Khayelitsha, Cape Town, versus that Black BE type who sends his kids to St. Stithians and lives in Sandton or wherever the expensive neighborhoods here in Johannesburg. That's the big gap. So my question is, why persist with the race-based legislation when clearly it doesn't work?
Well, it works for the few. Let's go back to SAA now, right? We are told that SAA was basically about to get liquidated, the business rescue had failed, and the government was tired of bailing them out. We are then told of a Takatso consortium, which came from absolute nowhere, not even from left field, from absolute nowhere. We are told about a Takatso consortium, which is a 110% BEE compliant company, which will now buy the state airline and rid the financial burden from the state. Where did Takatso Consortium come from? When you now start investigating some of the directors, it's people who are either by direct connection or through their spouse or family, people who are connected to, lo and behold, the ruling party. So again, right, the reason this gap exists between, I would say, Black people who have a little bit of money and those who are absolutely struggling is because the systems that are in place are designed to primarily, using BEE, target those who have access to the powers that be. And we're going to see this play out in grander fashion in the coming years as you see what happens with the energy crisis. As soon as all the cadres have set up whatever companies they need to, or whatever networks and infrastructure deals they need to benefit financially from it, that's when you'll now start hearing about how we need to fully unbundle Eskom and fully allow PPPs, private energy providers to plug into the grid, because they will already have those companies. You and I will still have to put in the work to see where we can benefit economically. We will typically even have to do things like take out a bank loan for the business. They don't have to do that. They are literally setting it up right now as we speak. And as soon as they're ready to go live with it, that's when you'll hear about new legislation which allows this. And of course, the legislation is going to be presented as rescuing South Africa from its existing energy crisis, which is a creation of the same government that is now coming up with a solution that benefits their buddies. So we're going to see this at a grander scale. We will rinse and repeat it for the freight network. Remember, the president at the previous State of the Nation address said he's inviting private players to also participate in putting our rail network where it needs to be. Not much has been said since. Why? Because his cronies aren't yet ready to benefit financially from that. And as soon as they're ready, you're going to now start seeing some private players all of a sudden getting involved with the resuscitation of the rail network. It's a rinse and repeat everywhere else. And who's the real loser here? It's you and I, who are just normal people. We wake up, we go to work, or we go to school, we come back home, we have our meal, kiss the kids goodnight, and do it all again tomorrow. While others are really digging trenches for them to benefit off of this in nefarious means.
Literally. And again, dear viewer, don't take Ukoketsu's word for it. Chief Justice Raymond Zondo said as much. You remember, of course, the Chief Justice was the chairperson of the State Capture Committee. And if you go to the report that was released by this particular committee, especially Volume 1, Part 1, page 797, where he basically says it, and I'm going to try and quote directly here, there is a relationship between race-based economic policy to corruption in this country, in the sense of, as Ukoketsu described it, whenever there is an opportunity, an economic opportunity, it isn't parceled out on the basis of who is poor and will benefit the best of that. No. It's not even parceled out on the very basis of race that it seems to argue. Because if you are really benefiting broadly black people, then it would be poor black people who should be at the front of the queue. Oh no. Who is benefiting from this? It's the black elite. And that's exactly what we've seen with this legislation. And it's also been the gateway drug, if I can call it that, for the very sort of corruption that we're seeing here. Koket, we're out of time. Final word from you. And how do the folks get in touch with you?
So probably the best way to get in touch with me is through my Twitter profile. Don't ask why it's blue. But yeah, look, I mean, my final word would be, guys, we need to be very vigilant in terms of how Treasury is actually allocating some of our funds. This isn't really mentioned a lot of the time. On paper, we spend a hell of a lot of money on education, while at the same time, the standard of our public education is going down, creating grand opportunities for private education players. So we need to start asking questions about where this money is actually being sent, and not just do it proactively instead of waiting for something like a State of the Nation, a budget speech, or some other middle of the year event, such as a stage 8 load shedding, for instance. We need to start asking these questions and start holding our government accountable, and when necessary, punish the government. According to me, ideally, you do it at the voting booth.
That is, of course, Ukoketsu Resane, co-host on the Man Patriot Show. Ukoketsu, thank you very much for your time, and thank you for your time. Let me know what you think about this conversation. Are you, like me, becoming ever increasingly cynical when you see the sort of crass materialism, if I can steal from Karl Marx in that particular expression, but the show of conspicuous wealth in public by people who you're not quite sure where they get that particular wealth, and especially in light of a country that is becoming poorer. Look out for that episode of Vuganazo tomorrow morning. You remember, on your screens from 7:30 in the morning, where I talk about those particular findings by Capitec Research, Capitec Bank, through their research division, that show that South Africans are getting poorer. But hey, you let me know what you think in the comment section. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again, possibly next week, for another episode of the Big Daddy Liberty Show. You forgot. You thought I'll forget to say it. And remember, never trust a commie.